the past, the present, we now dip into the future, and Will from Hivestack is going to give us a glimpse into what the world looks like. I'm sure we definitely know what the world's going to look like in general, but specific to digital out-of-home, as we come out of lockdown, everything starts to ease, and thankfully we start to get back into city centres en masse and other places as well. So to enlighten us and leave us on a very positive high, Will, the next 5 minutes is all yours to talk about the future.
Well, cheers, James, and afternoon, everyone. I am Will, I'm Managing Director at Hivestack, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about what the future of digital out-of-home holds. So if we could switch on to the next slide. So I think it's a really good exercise to, to every once in a while, just take a step back and actually see or think about what the future holds for the channel that we operate in. So I think we spend a lot of time managing the day-to-day and also the innovations that are happening now that actually I think we forget to look just a few steps ahead. And it's actually quite an interesting process to go through. And I've always loved out of home as a channel, despite being in full comms planning for much of my earlier career. And I've probably shown my years now, but I actually specialize in out of home when there was static only. So I've actually watched the development really into kind of these new formats coming into play, a bit like Trivision, for example, when you're seeing rotating static ads, which really brought about the concept of a loop before it kind of moved on to digital. And obviously what we're talking about now and the level of investment, the level of infrastructure that's been put in place is quite incredible. But out of home has always had that kind of slow and steady wins the race approach. And we've seen consistent growth in the channel for many years now. And I think programmatic as a whole is basically the new kid on the block. And as an approach, it's been around for the last few years, but it's been evident that the COVID has really accelerated the adoption of programmatic. And that said, I think, again, there's a common misconception that the development of programmatic in out of home, we now have the added benefit to target like the most niche, the most granular audiences. And we often sort of laugh about it in Hivestack, where we basically talk about being able to target the 27-year-old guy who's got 3 dogs, who loves doing yoga at the weekend as in catering, for example. So taking it to that absolute extreme. And I really think this isn't really where the future of out of home is. And I think what we have to remember, and it's been touched upon before, that unlike programmatic online, out of home is one-to-many. It's not one-to-one, and it's a channel that really targets mass audiences in public spaces. What we can do, though, is apply the principles of programmatic online. And I think what the future of out of home will be is the ability to target audience at an absolutely greater scale than we ever have done before, without the restraint of what we've been accustomed to in kind of out of home in previous years, with all the flexibility and the control that you would expect from the online world. So there's a little kind of phrase going around Hivestack that seems to have stuck at the moment, which is really smarter, not smaller. And I think it's just a really nice way to think about what programmatic can bring to the digital out of home space. And we're actually seeing the early stages of this principle now. So when I wake up in the morning and make myself a coffee and log into the Hivestack UI, I can see lots and lots of dots all over a kind of global map. And actually, when you really think about what those dots represent, it's a really interesting, they're public screens in public places, and there's hundreds and, thousands of people, across the week moving past those screens. And that's a really interesting concept that you can log into a platform now, and it really opens up a global inventory. And you can start with all the controls that you would expect, start targeting these audiences without restriction. So I think audience activation without these boundaries is really going to be the future of this space. So moving on to the next slide. So keeping smarter, not smaller in the back of your mind, really with a programmatic approach now, we have the ability to activate against audiences wherever they may be, but just in a much more sophisticated way and a much greater scale than ever before, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. And out of home's actually had a long history of using data in really sophisticated ways for out of home. It could be telecoms, it could be financial data, transactional, sensors, panel, demographic, you name it. It's been used for out of home planning and, strategic work, panel distribution, etc. So, it's really in recent years, our application and the ability to layer data sets has greatly improved. However, where out of home has seen limitations has really been about activation against the data. And this is where programmatic for me really adds value. We now have the buying and selling, so we shouldn't forget about the sell side. So the buying and selling flexibility to make decisions about a screen outside of the standard spot and loop. And this is a real leap forward in our sort of capability. So we're now able to dip in and out of spots in different screens at different times when we see a high audience concentration. And it's really changing, I guess, a screen unit into a living, breathing sort of content stream for advertisers. And that's something that's really exciting to think about. So it's really not enough now just to have a better understanding of consumers' movements. We have to be able to act on what the data is showing us, and we have to be able to act. And James has rightly mentioned this a number of times, at right time, right location, right environment, right message as well. So, and that's really what programmatic is beginning to offer us. And the future of the space really will be moving towards more and more gradually real time, because what we can do at the moment is buying decisions can be made in real time, but those decisions are still based on historical data. And that's the breakthrough that we need to make. And I think that breakthrough will likely come with our improved ability to sort of geolocate to pinpoint accuracy, to have custom geofences for every single digital out-of-home screen that takes into account where the screen's positioned, its viewability, the environment in which it sits, and basically the size of the screen as well. And if you marry those together, you start to get a better profile of locations and screens almost acting like digital tags, especially as connectivity of the screens improves. And I guess the big part will then be the real challenge, managing the live streaming of real world data and actually processing it in a comprehensible and kind of actionable way. On to the next slide.
Thank you. Thank you, Will.
Still going, James, still going. So last but not least, it's, you know, really for me, and it has been touched on before as well, and a couple of the other speakers, but our improved ability to report and measure out of home in real time, we start to see much smarter sort of screen agnostic solutions. So reporting and measurement has always been a bit of a sticking point out of home. And I've always dreaded audits and econometric studies that meetings I've had to go into where I've basically had to come armed to the teeth with counter arguments to protect out of home spend and really demonstrate the value of the channel. And what we're seeing now with the birth of programmatic digital out of home is the birth of like a new screen planner. So one that's either taking their specialist out of home knowledge and upskilling on the online world, a bit like myself, or someone who's a digital native that looking at out of home now as a new and exciting space to target audiences in the offline world. So I think this new breed of planner that you'll see in agencies will be the future, and it'll basically come with much more sophisticated cross-screen activations that are planned with real synergy in mind and actually like a common objective. So with this real measurement, planners will be able to see down to like a screen level which sites are performing better against their KPIs. You'll be able to adjust in flight, in campaign, which is something that we've never experienced before in out of home. And you can apply those learnings across the complete channel mix to basically give yourself or identify the optimal blend of media to deliver against your KPIs. So really with this, I'd encourage everyone, you know, all digital offline and online planners to take a serious look at the out of home space now and actually the developments that have been made. And that's me.
Well, that was brilliant. And you almost read my mind in terms of the question on. I think the idea of like a screen planner is such a smart one, because it feels like whether it's a mobile phone or a desktop, or, you know, we're going to get to the point where it's a car dashboard even, or a panel. It's kind of, if you think about context and creative, you sort of need someone to do across that rather than one department here, one department there. How much of a reality do you think that is at the moment? You know, is it still quite a progressive thing for agencies to be doing, or?
Well, I've actually come from the agency side in full comms planning. So, you know, I've seen it happening now. So that's the interesting part about this. It's really, it's who goes first. And that's the thing. It's sort of the outdoor specialists in agencies are sort of joining forces with the programmatic online teams to try and find some common ground. And it is actually, it's a new, you know, out of home is a difficult channel to plan. It's unique in the way in which it delivers. There's no kind of there's no path back. You can't do any kind of tagging or retargeting, etc. at the moment. So, you know, it's a really interesting new space for programmatic buyers, but also for out of home people to start learning the programmatic space. And I think that is happening right now. And I said, you'll just see this breed of new planner that really can operate across both channels.
Yeah, I like it. I really, really like thinking. Will, that was great. Great note to finish on. Thank you very, very much. We've got a couple of questions that are coming in, but if you've got a question for any of our panelists, please put it into the Q&A. I wonder if everyone can just come camera on, as if you were coming up and sitting on one of those wobbly stools that we used to have on stages where we can sort of sit awkwardly. Question for James, probably, because it's on dynamic creative. What level of data can be inputted into my programmatic buyer to influence the creative? From my understanding, asks Kane, it's fairly limited and it's only the stuff that's collected through mobile data. What do you think, James?
Well, yeah, obviously it does depend a little bit on the DSP you're using, what technology stack you have and the data sources you're using. But it's certainly not what I see, and certainly not what I've seen across the campaigns that I've been working on. There are lots of things that can impact the creative. You know, we've touched on a couple of examples in this presentation. So things like store occupancy, weather, geo, time, date, the audience you're looking to target. You know, I worked on one the other day which was to do with air pollution. So, you know, I'm hearing of campaigns activated on R rating, things like that, you know, based on the COVID levels. So yeah, it's one of those areas that is getting a lot of interest. And what I would say is that there is a lot of things that you can do now to dynamically activate the creative outside of just mobile data.
Yeah. Hannah, one on agencies. What difference would it make for you if digital out-of-home media owners could deliver impression performance data on minute, hourly, weekly level based on how many people passed or moved through the screen? So we're talking about this sort of very, very real time. I mean, I guess you need someone to look at that on a minute, weekly, hourly basis and do something with that, I guess. But how much of a difference would that make?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously from a planning perspective, so I completely agree with Will, that I think that teams will stop being silos. And essentially the role of the planner will change to across every channel. And I think that kind of data is obviously very useful when you're using it to compare to other more online channels as well, which have that data. So you can look at user journeys a little bit more. Yeah. Two queries I probably would have about it is, I'm from the online programmatic space, like historically. And I think one of the problems that we've had in that space is granularity for granularity's sake, a lot of the time as well. So obviously looking at it at a more aggregated level to inform things like planning and measurement is important, but you wouldn't be able to use it to do things like you do with TV, for example, where you're looking at second screening, people searching as soon as they've seen an ad. Like, it's just not the way people interact with out of home. And then I would also query it potentially with cookieless and moving into more of a data privacy space. Like, how accurate is that data actually going to be if people are turning things like location tracking off? And it is something we are looking at with some of our measurement partners as well. So.
Emily, you're nodding furiously in places there. What do you think? How
yeah.
Well, one, can you do it? And two, how practical is it?
I mean, obviously we're using SDK data more and more to sort of get that granularity that we haven't had in the past. But I think one of the main differences with out of home compared to the online sphere is, you know, because it's so multifaceted, so many things need to be taken into consideration, and we need to ensure that that robustness and rigor stays, you know, throughout. You know, so we need to understand, you know, when we're talking about impressions, Root doesn't measure impressions, it measures impacts, you know, human interactions that are based on sort of how long someone's been there, what speed they've been traveling at, you know, whether they were high or low. You know, there's so many, you know, things that need to be taken into consideration to ensure this accuracy. So whilst we can and are exploring, you know, more up-to-date data, it always has to be underwritten sort of by this gold standard of Root, you know, to explain, you know, this exciting but multifaceted, you know, channel that we measure.
And I think Hannah's right. You can get into sort of data for data's sake. You've always got too much of it. You kind of don't know what to do with. Cedric, I wonder if I can come to you for a really good question from Ginny. In a potential cookieless online world, do you think digital planners will look to digital out of home to be a solution to that problem?
Potentially. I think the ability to map trends in audience behaviour gives us that ability to start to look at, you know, where audiences are travelling, how often they're frequenting certain areas, and, you know, other data sources are being used. You know, we've got access to data across our underground networks that start to give us a much deeper dive into audience behaviour, and that's, you know, been evidenced in some of the things that we've brought out over the course of the last year. But I think that goes wider across the outdoor estate, and the ability, I guess, as I sort of referenced just now, to map that audience behaviour. You know, whether or not it's something that will be happening in the next year or so.
Yeah.
Unlikely, but it's certainly something that we can build towards with the data that we have at our fingertips. And
it feels like post third-party cookie, I mean, if you talk to online publishers, they're fairly upbeat about it. Suddenly, I mean, context has always been incredibly important. Well, if you've been a planner, you'll know that. But suddenly the pendulum sort of swings back to context being really, really important. And, there's sort of no better, one of the most contextually rich places, I guess, is out of home, because you play into location and things like that. So perhaps that could be a factor too.
100%. I touched on context and the uplift that it gives in terms of campaign effectiveness during my slides. And, again, we've seen it. And if we take the sort of last year out of the equation, and we look at the way in which brands have been using it over the last decade and gradually growing into digital outdoors potential, learning from the way in which you use it to really amplify the benefits of context, I think that can only grow and improve with a wider estate and with a better understanding of audience movement.
Will, you kind of touched on it earlier, but I'm really interested when it comes to agency side, and maybe we'll come to you as well, Hannah, is who's predominantly buying the digital out of home? Is it traditional, if you like, in inverted commas, out of home buyers, specialists like Kinetic, etc., or is it people with a search, a sort of a paid social programmatic skill set?
Yeah, I'd say for still very much within the kind of out-of-home specialist world. I think we're right at the beginning of that journey. As I mentioned, sort of COVID has sort of sped things up, and the adoption rate, and there's a lot of connection work to be done behind the scenes. It's a bit like the first stages of online, and everyone's connecting to everyone and building up the pipes, really. And we've got to a stage now where we have a scalable solution. So now it becomes a reality, and I think then it's about education. So, the out-of-home guys know how to plan well, but they need a bit of that kind of upskilling on programmatic, and that's where the joining together of the two teams happens. Yeah. But the money still really does, and kind of planning sits with the outdoor specialists for sure. And we would love the kind of digital planners to get more and more involved in the space. Yeah. And I think that once you see that kind of blend happening, it could be a really exciting time. And a lot of the time we're building products and features that make out of home more accessible. So, as I said, it's a unique way of planning out of home. It's it does take a little bit of time to understand context as well, and how to plan around context. Yeah. And I think that's a kind of interesting space. If you can create products and features that are really helpful to digital natives that make out of home accessible, and then also educate, I think that's where we're going to have some real breakthroughs.
Does that ring true the way you're set up at Tug, Hannah?
Yeah, so we're actually a digital first agency. We started as an SEM agency actually, so now we're doing out of home. It's so different, but I think there's also, I completely agree with Will. I think there's some habits you kind of have to get out of as a digital planner and buyer. So you have to just kind of get out of the notion that the only good data is real time data as well. So I think, you do kind of have to unlearn from that and take a step back and look at the bigger picture. And then I think likewise whenever I've spoken to sort of more traditional publishers and traditional teams, like they sometimes not struggle with the complexities of programmatic. I think programmatic people like to talk about how complex programmatic is more than it actually is as well. So I think there's definitely a lot of skill sharing that can happen, and I think that is the way that it's gonna start moving as well. Yeah.
Making programmatic sound complicated keeps programmatic people in programmatic jobs, and that should never be underestimated. Zoo, I'd love to ask you about creativity and about everything that we've heard in terms of dynamic creative and personalization and context. Things that you've seen or campaigns you've run, even. I mean, you talked a bit about the Westfield one there, that have just done very, very clever things. I mean, it might not be spellboundingly award-winning, but just really smart stuff with feeds or personalization, just to give us a sense of what's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't mean to toot our own horn here about awards, but we did win 2 last week. So a really clever campaign that we ran with Renault in Belgium used pollution level triggers. So it was to promote the Renault Zoe, which is an electric car. And so it would monitor kind of the pollution levels in the area and then serve a dynamic creative based on whether the pollution levels were high, low or medium. And that saw absolutely amazing results. there was like a 144% increase in search terms for the Renault Zoe afterwards. So, you know, there are loads of data triggers that can be used. It's kind of like limitless, really. But that was a real innovative kind of use of that. And it also kind of opens up that kind of avenue for advertisers to think about having like always on deals as well. So post that campaign, Renault actually had an always on deal, and you know, with the use of programmatic, it's just optimizing the spend and making sure that the campaign budget is utilized effectively as well.
Thank you. We have run out of time, which is a shame because I feel like we're in full flow. Thank you all very, very much. What I love about these events is the fact that rising tide really does float all boats. Thank you for all taking your individual company hats on and doing an amazing job of representing digital out of home. As I said at the start, everything that you've heard today is going to be in written format. All the charts are going to be available online. Just go and search for it at IABUK.com. A massive, massive thank you to everyone today, to Zoo, to Will, to Cedric, to James, to Emily, to Hannah, and of course to that is everyone. That is everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for joining us as well. There's a wonderful message in the chat. Thank you, Douglas. We will see you again soon, probably for Digital Trust Forum. But thank you for joining us this afternoon. Cheers.